Hello, welcome to the first YouTube video for the Inspiring Growth podcast. I'm Lauren and I'll be your host. So this is episode 6 and I have been so incredibly blessed. Yeah, that's the word I'm going to use. So incredibly blessed to have an interview with Dr. Rebecca Ray. So she is an author of 10 books, 6 of which are print and the rest are on Audible. Her book, this podcast interview is around her book, Setting Boundaries. That book was the next book in my journey, the first real book that I read, because my psychologist that I was seeing at the time had said to me that I needed to start setting some boundaries with people in my life. And I was like, what do you mean setting boundaries? I'd never heard of this before. I'd never heard of setting boundaries. And then I found this book and it's pink. And I was like, oh, I love that. And it's like on this journey, you'll see that every book, every podcast, every YouTube clip, everything that I came across was exactly what I needed at that stage in my journey. And exactly this book, Setting Boundaries, was just the biggest game changer for me. So in this podcast episode, Dr. Beck goes into a bit about her journey and kind of how she came to that stage of burnout, what was going on for her then. We also go into some boundaries that I was unknowingly crossing and what was going on for me. And then she shares her perspective on that from a psychology level. We also discuss 3 steps for dealing with the backlash of someone who isn't willing, excited, respectful of our boundary that we put in place. And then she also gives a definition for psychological safety, among many other things. So welcome to this episode. I'll see you soon. Okay, so welcome everyone. Welcome to episode 6. Today we have Dr. Rebecca Ray. Now, I was reading just a little bit about Beck, and so she was a pilot turned clinical psychologist. She's now a best-selling author with 6 books. Is that right?
I think it's 6 now, 6 print, and I think it's 9 if we include Audible. Maybe it's 10 now. It's a few. Anyway, it's a few.
Yes, absolutely. And so you're also a speaker. One of my clients actually went to see you on the Gold Coast when you were releasing Difficult People. And and I also see that you've got a regular spot on Channel 9. Is it the Today Show? Yeah. And showings on ABC News Corp. And so just a little blurb from your website. It says that you're a student of life on a mission to use science-backed heart and hard truth approach to helping big picture thinking people live a life that's fulfilling, unapologetic, and free. So I'm just so excited to be connected with you. That your books, I've read Setting Boundaries 3 times, and
wow.
It's
almost as many times as I've read it because I had to edit it that much.
I can only imagine that you'd literally by the end of it, you'd be like, all right, let's just get it over and done with.
Yeah, it's like, don't make me read it again. Please don't.
That's why you hire a publisher, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So beautiful. So I was reading a bit about your story and a bit about how you changed because you've had 20 years as a clinical psychologist. Is that correct?
Yes, this is my 20th year. 2023 is my 20th anniversary.
That's huge. And so you're no longer practicing, is that correct?
I'm still registered because all the other work that I do is still psychology based. So I spend lots of time preparing content that's psychology or based in psychology, but I'm no longer in clinical practice.
Yes, that was what I was meaning. So I would love if you could share your story of what happened, because I was reading a lot about it and about how you were, anyway, you tell your story.
So you want me to focus on the burnout? Is that the best story for me to tell, do you think?
So how you thought you'd become a pilot so that you could have that name and seek that worth through your
so if you want to start there, that was an interesting process. I decided I wanted to be a psychologist at a careers night when I was 15. My best friend, who's a psychologist today, her dad is a psychologist, and we grew up together. And I just thought it would be so incredibly interesting to learn why humans do what they do. I thought psychology would teach me that. That's a lie. Psychology teaches you some of that, but certainly not all of it. And so after school, I went to grade 12. I went straight into uni, studying a Bachelor of Business in Human Resource Management combined with a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology. And in my first year at uni, I was just such an anxious teen. So I'm 18 at this point, right? Straight out of school, just turned 18. And I felt I'm not going to say I felt worthless. I just didn't feel okay as I was without doing something to prove myself. I come from a family that are high achievers, in their chosen fields, and not necessarily academic. They're high achievers in business. And so I really felt like I needed to do something to prove to, I don't know, the ether, the universe, I don't know, to prove that I was okay. And my grandfather, Ronnie, he was a private pilot, my best friend, one of the great loves of my life. He's no longer with us. He passed away in 2014, but I still talk to him daily. He was a private pilot, and he said to me, if you can drive a car, you can fly a plane. And I was like, if I could fly a plane, then surely that would make me worthy. Like, surely that would make the anxiety go away, right? Like, if you can fly a plane, you must be confident. So I went.
And were you kind of like subconsciously wanting your parents' approval or their attention?
I think every child wants their parents' approval. It wasn't so much their attention. I just wanted to do something that felt significant. I mean, they were already proud. They were already, like, they never said you need to do something more to prove anything to us, but I just felt like that. So I got my private pilot's license, very quickly discovered that just because you can fly a plane does not make anxiety go away at all. And in fact, I spent my time flying getting even more anxious. So my answer to that was, well, surely you just do more flying, which then means you get more confident. And so I got a commercial pilot's license, a multi-engine rating, a night flying rating, and then I won a scholarship to do more training through a airline, and I got an instructor's rating.
Wow.
And by that point, I was like, holy shit, now I need to be paid to fly. Like, now I need to get a job. Like, now we're past the point of training. I now need to be responsible for either passengers or someone that's relying on me to fly their freight or something like that. And it was at that point that I really had to acknowledge that, wanting to vomit on the way to the airport is probably not the best way to start your career. because I'm someone that doesn't do anything by halves. So I kind of made flying my whole personality.
Yes.
And even though I was still studying psych at the time. And so I just couldn't
doing both
I was doing both my university studies and also flying in my holidays and on the weekends. Just a huge load, right? And just got to the point where that was too much. And I really had to acknowledge that flying violated all my non-negotiables. So I'm someone that's super comfortable with words and super comfortable at a desk. I'm so boring. Like, I am literally the most boring person you will ever meet. I love going to the same desk, the same computer at the same time each day. That's just how I'm wired. I remember treating police when I did a lot of work with police and military personnel when I was in clinical practice. And I remember one of my cops said to me, I could not fucking do what you do on a daily basis because it's just all the same. And I was like, well, it's not the same because everything changes in my head, you know, like the fireworks are in my head. It's just that I do the same things in terms of my routine, and everything changes on a daily basis with flying. And Ronnie didn't lie, but he kind of did. So it was true for him. He could drive anything, fly anything, sail anything, build anything. His visuospatial skills were remarkable, but mine suck. And I don't reverse park my car, right? Like mine suck. I could fly a plane, but it wasn't comfortable. So I returned to psychology feeling like an absolute failure because all this money had been invested in my flying training. It's an incredibly expensive pursuit, even more so today. And I just thought, well, now I need to make up for that huge failure. And so I completed my postgraduate study and started my own practice. And
sorry, do you mind if I ask, was that something that you paid for, the training, or was that something that your parents paid for?
Both. So I was also working at the time. So I was working, studying and flying. So any money that I made went towards flying training, and then family members chopped it up when it was necessary.
I can imagine that would have added to that kind of
absolutely. There was such a huge sense of I owed something as a result of this. Not that was ever hung over my head. My parents were always very supportive when it came to my pursuits, both academically and also when I was flying. But then I still walked away going, I need to make up for that now because I'm no longer doing it. So I started my own private practice after my postgraduate study, and within about a year, 6 months or a year, I was booked out, and I just devoted so much to clinical work. Bloody loved it. Like, some of the greatest work I've ever done. I just loved spending time with people, and the privilege of sitting in therapy space with people was just incredible. I just loved it. And because I felt like I needed to make up for that failure, and still didn't really feel worthy, I guess, despite accomplishments that are unusual, I threw myself into clinical practice and ended up just doing a shitload of work. Like, honestly, I would never advise a supervisee to do the amount of work that I did. And yet I did it for multiple reasons. Both to appear like I was a hard worker. That's a value that's very strong in my family. You need to, if you don't work hard, then laziness is frowned upon. So I was proving that I was a hard worker. I already knew that. Like, it's not, that didn't need to be proved, but in my head it did at the time. And then I was paying off debt. So from a family that's very financially independent and responsible. So I was paying off debt from, seriously, the debt that I'd invested into my flying, debt from uni. So I went, once I finished my doctorate, I went overseas to travel just for 6 weeks. And then I came back and I bought a block of land and I built a house, and not with my own hands. And I started a new business. There were all these, like, it was almost like I needed to throw myself into something else. And then I ended up with this practice where I was in demand as a therapist, and I didn't want to let anyone down. I didn't want to let my patients down, and I didn't want to let my referring doctors down. And that meant that I hardly ever said no to seeing anyone. I just was always available. And unfortunately, that meant that I landed in my 30s and just woke up. Oh, it's not, I didn't wake up one day. This was like, it was building over a period of years where I just would have Sunday night blues, and Sunday night blues turned into Sunday morning blues, which turned into Saturday blues, which turned into Friday blues, which turned into every night before work blues. And so I tried to tackle that by reducing my hours. So I reduced the days that I worked. I reduced the number of clients that I would see in a day. I took more holidays, but I just left it way too late to do something about it. I just ignored my intuition for so long that I got to the point where I was like, I think I'm done. Like, I don't think I can do this anymore. And so I remember the date. It was the 15th of January, 2015. I had lunch with a colleague of mine, and I was crying. And he said to me, you know, Beck, you're going to need to stop before your body stops for you. And I was like, this is bullshit. Like, I planned to be a clinical psychologist in practice until I was like 70. Like, it was something I could do forever. And here I was in my 30s having to look in the mirror and go, I'm not sure if I could do this. So I was like, well, fine, I'll just take a break. Fine. And so I took time off thinking that I could go back. And I did go back part-time when we needed the money. But even within a couple of months, I knew I was done. Like, that was it. And so the last client I saw was the day before I gave birth to my baby, who's now 5.5. And I was then left with, what the fuck do you do when you've trained for 8 years to be a psychologist and you can't be a psychologist anymore? Like, I had to rebuild my entire career. And, you know, the secret is, Lauren, I still don't know what I'm doing. Like, I still don't know. Like, I've just cobbled together this kind of career where I'm still occasionally worried about how I'm going to pay my bills, but still trying to do what I love. You know, psychology is still my first love. And so now I write books and do speaking gigs and basically access as many audiences as I possibly can to still offer this powerful wisdom of understanding our psyche and how it can transform people's lives.
Oh my God. I love that so much. And, you know, what you've just shared about what's happened for you internally as well as externally resonates so much with my own story. I had a 9-year career as a travel agent. I was working 7 a.m. till 7:30 p.m. sometimes, 7 till 10. Like, it was ridiculous, but I loved it. I loved every moment of it. I had no lunch breaks. Like, I just wanted to make everyone happy. Like, my goal was to help people's travel dreams come true. And I had like 90% repeat customers. I was winning awards here, and it just made me feel so good. And I got to travel the world. That was my goal when I was 16. And then I got to the stage, COVID happened, and the year before that, I was like, I really need a break. Like, I'm really tired. I just need a month off. And this is what I'm saying in my head. And then COVID happened, and then all my staff got fired because I had my own store. And then I was like, okay, cool. Well, I can just chill out. And then a few months later, my dad died. And I went, I don't want to do this anymore. I hate this. I'm living someone else's life. And I just had that moment of, I can't do this anymore. And so
like that moment of reckoning where you have to, hold on, this is not working.
Yes. Yeah. And so that's when I went on this journey of self discovery of, what can I do that's different to this? And it's crazy because I resonate so much with, and people talk to me about, oh, what are you going to do for money? And I'm like, money always finds me. Like, I'm just doing what I enjoy. And, you know, it's all good. Like, I'm not in that same kind of, I resonate with that. And I also, so many of my clients and so many people in my community have experienced incredibly similar experiences where they've reached that kind of breaking point and they've gone, nah, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. So I
My
just
pleasure.
I just kind of want to the book Setting Boundaries.
Hmm?
I just want to preface talking about because my mum's going to listen to this, and talking about
Hi,
my
Mum.
yeah. I had a conversation anyway. I'll tell you that in a second, but I just want to preface that, you know, my parents were doing the best that they could do, and they're not bad people, and the way that they showed up was the only way that they were taught how to. In their generation, you know, their parents dealt with war, famine, like so many things. So providing for a kid was a roof over your head and food on the table. Like that was kind of it. And the way that they went about disciplining me was in their eyes in my best interest. So I just kind of want to preface that.
Yeah.
But I also want to just give some acknowledgement and just praise to you, because I found the book Setting Boundaries and I went, holy crap, this is why I feel the way that I do, because I've never had any of my boundaries ever respected. I didn't even know that I had boundaries. And I'm like, this is why I feel so angry when someone says this to me. But so I had this whole realization reading the book, and then I finished, and then so a week after I finished reading the book, my boyfriend cheated on me. And in that moment, I was like, okay, this is a boundary crossing. I've just read how to handle this situation and how to communicate. And I felt empowered in not reacting and being aggressive. And he come to me and told me that he cheated. And I said, okay, I'm just going to need some space. I'm just going to leave and I'll be back in a couple of hours. And then I come and I went out of the house, and then I cried and rang girlfriends and whatever. And then I came in and I was like, okay, you can pack your things and leave. Like, I'll give you a couple of days and you can leave. And then, you know, and before reading the book, I would have begged him to take me back. And it was just like, because I thought that in order to be loved, I had to give up all my boundaries. If I had boundaries, that meant that no one would love me, because when I was a kid, those boundaries weren't respected. And if I tried to say, no, this is what I want to do, I would get disciplined. I would get, you know, sent to my room. Love would be removed from you know, sorry, mum, please.
Yeah, it would become unavailable.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my God, thank you so much. That's great. Yeah. So what I really wanted to do was just kind of talk about some of the boundaries that I didn't know about, and some of the boundary violations that I was doing for myself. And I just kind of want to get you to speak to that, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
Beautiful. So as I said, I was working, you know, 7 a.m. till 7:30 p.m. every day, 5 days a week, sometimes 6. I was always messaging clients, never had any lunch breaks. And I would look at these other people and I'd be like, how the fuck are they leaving at 5:30? How can they leave when they still have work outstanding? They haven't called back that customer. And I was just so frustrated at how I couldn't, but they could. And like, I wasn't having lunch until 3 to 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I couldn't go to the toilet. And then there were these people who were having cigarette breaks every fucking half an hour. And I was like, how come they're allowed to do that, but I'm not? I would love for you to speak on that, because I know so many friends, clients who think the same as what I used to, and I would love for you to speak to what that is around for boundaries.
It's a couple of things. And first of all, I need to honor the customer service work ethic. I do think that there's a lot to be said for having integrity in customer service. And that means that you need to have powerful boundaries in customer service too. If you say that you're going to contact a client or a customer on that day, you should follow through on that unless there's an emergency. I think one of the things that happens in customer service that frustrates customers is this lack of integrity, that the fact that expectations are not set, and if expectations are set, then they're not followed through upon. Beautiful. So one of the things that you could have been doing not so well, that other people might have been doing a little better, is setting different expectations with customers. So you can be devoted to your customers in a boundaried way. And it sounds like you were devoted in an unboundaried way. So there was no filter. They had constant access to you, which, as you learned the hard way, I also learned it the hard way. In fact, most things I learn the hard way. Possibly why I'm good at writing books about it. But I think one of the things that it's worth noting is that you can give of yourself, but if you do so in an unboundaried way, then eventually you end up giving from empty giving tanks. And I talk about the giving tanks in setting boundaries: your personal resources, your time, your energy, your care, your attention, your money, your love, all of it sits in your kind of intangible giving tanks. And if you give without checking in how much you've got available for yourself, then oftentimes you can be operating from rusty tanks, which is probably what you ended up doing. One of the things that I would say, though, is it's not your work ethic that's the problem. It's the way that you practiced it. So if you were able to set different expectations with your customers, you can still stay in integrity. So that might look like having an email responder that says, hey, I've got your email. So great to hear from you. You can expect to hear back from me in the next 48 hours, so that customers have an expectation of when you're going to reply, rather than I'll text you at 10 p.m., because you've asked something from me. So I think one of the hardest things for women in particular to learn when it comes to boundaries is just because somebody makes a request of you doesn't mean you need to act on that request. And requests can look like different things. Someone can literally ask you to do something. They can email you and expect a reply. They can text you when you feel the urge to respond. That urge to respond is sometimes so difficult to reject or resist, because we are conditioned to people please, and we're conditioned to be good girls, and we're conditioned to placate and negotiate and mediate and be the ones that are responsible for other people's feelings. So I think the first thing to think about is you don't need to compromise your integrity. You just need to make sure that your expectations are well communicated. That other people's expectations are communicated in line with your boundaries. The other thing to think about, especially when you're talking about your work hours, I can relate to those work hours as well. That does not happen today, I'm proud to say. Or maybe if I'm on a deadline. I do have a tendency to push very hard up against a deadline when I'm writing a book, mainly because I am a master procrastinator. But we won't go into...
It's a great way to get motivation, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Deadlines are great, but also, let's not make this about my issues. Of which there are many and countless even. I think when you think about your work hours and when you think about how much you give to your work, the thing that we need to consider is what I refer to as internal boundaries. Now, internal boundaries are boundaries between you and yourself. No one else is coming. No one else is going to tell you that you need to fix those boundaries. So that could be how long you scroll on your phone before you go to bed, how often you exercise, what you eat, how much you give of yourself at work. So you were finishing work so much later than other people. That's a boundary between you and you, especially because it was your store. So you set your own hours, right? No one was forcing you to do those hours. And sometimes what happens is we betray ourselves, right? We abandon our own needs in favor of making someone else happy.
Yeah.
And it sounds like that's what you did repeatedly, which feels great when you're a customer. You actually feel very much cared for and you feel very respected and you know that you're in good hands. But what it also does is it actually encourages the people that you're working with to violate your boundaries even more because you've got none. So if you, and this is the hard thing about boundaries, right? If you don't communicate your boundaries, then they essentially don't exist. I mean, we're talking about emotional boundaries, right? We're not talking about physical and sexual boundaries. Of course, those boundaries exist and they should be just assumed. Consent is another discussion. It's another conversation. But when we're talking about emotional boundaries and those kind of intangible boundaries, if you haven't actually communicated them, then they don't exist. And the hard thing about some of those boundaries is we often learn those boundaries for ourselves the hard way. Sometimes we don't know that we have those boundaries until we cross them. You know, we don't set a boundary, someone else crosses them and we're like, oh, that feels like shit, actually, which means I need to do something about that. But if you don't do something about that and communicate that boundary, then you're essentially abandoning yourself in the process. So I think this is about really being able to come to a place where you operate from a place of self-worth. In setting boundaries, I talk about how boundaries are the language of self-worth. And I think it does take a level of confidence to be able to communicate your boundaries, but you can only gain that confidence by giving yourself permission to have rights and needs and to communicate those to other people. But then the next part is knowing that you don't have to start a fight over it. Like so many, especially women have been conditioned to think that simply just having an opinion or simply just setting the most basic boundary is selfish or mean or unkind. And that's absolute bullshit. Like there couldn't be anything further than the truth. And yet we have been conditioned to think that we're diva-ish or we're being super unkind or we're being hysterical or we're difficult or we're hard to work with simply just because we expressed a need. And if a man did the same thing, he's considered confident, he's considered ambitious, he's judged with all these positive qualities. And so I think it's important to come back to the understanding that when you communicate your boundaries, you don't need to do so in a way that's aggressive. You can do so exactly like you did with your boyfriend, where you went away, calmed your nervous system, got some support from your people, and then came back and communicated that he'd actually crossed a boundary and you couldn't continue in the relationship based on that. Some people do choose to. I don't judge that either. This isn't a judgment on whether or not the relationship could continue. It's when you are able to go, actually, no, this is a hard line for me and it's been crossed. Therefore, these consequences look like this.
Yes. And I think that what was going on for me was that I had this conversation with my mum this morning. So and sorry, mum, for sharing this, she's going to be upset. But she said, well, what are boundaries? I was talking to her about having an interview with you. And I said, well, for example, when I came and stayed and you went to work and then you come home and then you yelled at me because I didn't do the dishes. And then I said to you that I'm more than happy to do the dishes in future. If you would like me to do the dishes, I would like you to ask me so that I know that that's what you want me to do. And so then she went into, I shouldn't have to ask you, you're 34 years old and all this sort of stuff. And I was like, I understand that that's what you think, but there's different rules in my house, and, you know, trying to explain that to her. But from her perspective, that's how she thinks that things should be run. And so what was going on for me when I was at work is that I was afraid that they were going to be upset with me. So I was afraid of that backlash of not doing what I had promised them. So I'd said I'll get back to them today. So I'd overpromised all of these people. And I was even afraid to say, I can't do it today, but I can do it tomorrow, because I was afraid that they were going to be upset with me.
Yeah. And you've just hit the nail on the head with the 2 reasons why setting boundaries, the book exists. One is because people don't know what boundaries are. Yeah. And secondly, because people are so afraid of getting a reaction that's negative, they don't set them in the first place. Yeah. So can I just talk to Mum for a minute? Mum, just so you know, boundaries are not, well, the way I consider boundaries is not necessarily what the dictionary would call a boundary. And for any listener that's listening to us right now, who's also with Mum thinking, what the heck are boundaries? Let me explain. I consider boundaries as circles of preservation and empowerment. They are the lines that we draw around ourselves to help us make choices about how we distribute our personal resources in a way that's consistent with who we want to be and what we want to stand for. That is our value system. So when you have personal resources like time, energy, love, care, attention, money, all those personal resources sit within you, and it's up to you how you distribute those to other people who want a piece of you. If you don't make sure that you set boundaries around how you distribute those personal resources, then other people get unfiltered access to those resources and you don't really have a say. Now, most of the time we're raised, certainly if you're like a whole decade younger than me, Lauren. So, you know, we're probably just different generations slightly, but potentially raised the same way, where essentially if you're going to be a good girl, then boundaries are kind of seen as something negative. When actually, if you give yourself permission to set boundaries, then not only are you making sure that the choices about how you live your life are kept to you and not given away to someone who's not you, but you're also giving other people in your life permission to set boundaries as well. And I think that's an incredibly powerful thing for our parents, who often had it much harder than we've had it when it comes to boundaries. Like they were raised to be seen and not heard. They, especially women, you know, so boundaries for them can actually feel incredibly threatening, like they're putting themselves in a very vulnerable position and are likely to receive negative pushback. And many of those women have received that pushback from either people younger than them who are growing up with a different view on themselves, but also their partners, their male partners in particular, who are in a place where they're saying, actually, no, it's my way or the highway. And I think it's really useful to understand that boundaries can be your way of getting your life back. They're your way of getting your freedom back over who you want to be and what you want to stand for. But you don't necessarily have to then judge yourself as being mean or selfish. It's simply about you deciding how your personal resources are going to be distributed. And I do need to talk just quickly to the backlash. The backlash can be so... I was going to say,
can you speak about that?
Yes.
That was actually one of the questions from someone in my community. How do I deal with the outburst from the other person when I set a boundary?
Yeah, and it's, you know, it's a really big thing. It's a thing that can get in the way time and time again of people setting boundaries.
And it makes it feel like it's easier to just not set the boundary than to deal with this outburst.
Absolutely. So the first thing to remember is that you get to have a say, you get to have an opinion about you and what you want to happen, and someone else doesn't have to agree with that. So just because there's disagreement, or just because someone else has a problem with the boundary that you want to set, doesn't mean that the boundary is wrong. It doesn't mean that you've done anything wrong. It simply just means that the other person was probably benefiting from you having no boundaries, and now they're uncomfortable with the fact that you're actually setting boundaries around resources that they previously had access to. The second thing to remember is that sometimes when it comes to setting boundaries for the first time, or when you're a beginner at setting boundaries, we can sometimes just go a bit too hard in the direction of aggression, because we confuse being assertive with having to like go in there and ready for a fight. You don't. And in fact, if you go in there ready for a fight, you'll often get a fight, because that's the energy that you're projecting out, and that's what the energy that the other person's receiving. So you need to give yourself some space to be learning and some space to get it wrong. and give yourself permission to repair that. You know, you can say to the person that you're setting a boundary with, I'm so sorry, I didn't say that in the way that felt good for me, and I don't think it felt good for you either. Let me try to say that in a different way. And then finally, when you get a reaction time and time again, so most people might have a bit of a reaction initially because they're getting used to this new boundary you. But if you continually get somebody's adjusting to it. But if you continually get pushback, if someone is continually having a go at you simply just for setting a boundary, then you need to remember that as an adult, you get to have permission to deny access to you from another adult that's psychologically unsafe for you. So if someone is continually disrespecting your attempts to set boundaries, you're allowed to then put distance between you and them. And that may not mean ending the relationship. It might just mean changing the way you communicate so that, you know, face-to-face becomes phone calls. Phone calls become emails become text messages. Text messages becomes seasonal cards, you know. Happy birthday, Merry Christmas. Okay, we're done now. And then eventually you get to the point where you need to rethink whether or not this person has a place in your life, depending on how psychologically safe they are for you. And I will just say here, there is so much more in the book about backlash. I have chapters and chapters and chapters on it. I can't do it justice in a very brief conversation, but please check out the book if you want to dive into that fear, because I think it's that fear that is so destructive when it comes to setting boundaries.
100%, absolutely. I just thank you so much for sharing those three things as well, that just to a T.
It's probably important to define psychological safety. Psychological safety was first defined by Amy Edmondson. She's a professor of leadership and management at Harvard, I think. And she defined it in a work context. So psychological safety at work means that you can speak up for your rights and your needs, and you can be creative, and you can present ideas, and you can innovate in the workplace, and you can make mistakes without fear of being punished or humiliated. I take that concept and translate it into a boundary setting, into our interpersonal relationships.
And so does that also include like being judged and being dismissed?
Not really, because we can't control other people. Like everyone's going to get judged because that's what humans do. We judge everyone. That's how we process information. It certainly does include how someone behaves towards you. So if they're dismissing you in a disrespectful way, if they're not hearing you, if they're not able to offer you empathy and compassion, then absolutely you might be dealing with someone that's psychologically unsafe. I would draw the line at judgment though, depending on how the judgment was being delivered. Like if someone's going, "Oh, you're a bitch," then sure, we need to like think about that. Do you actually want to be around someone that is communicating like that?
Yes.
But I think it's important to remember that humans judge. It's literally how we're wired. So when it comes to relationships, when I'm talking about psychological safety, I'm talking about you being able to be authentic, you being able to be vulnerable, and you being able to be imperfect and be okay to be that in the relationship. If you're not okay to be that, and if someone immediately comes down hard on you because you've made a mistake or because you've been vulnerable, you're likely not psychologically safe around them. And in that case, then boundaries are ever more important.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much. I just appreciate your energy so much, then this time that you've given to us. And if anyone wants to reach out, it's Dr. Rebecca Ray on Instagram.
Yes, Dr. Rebecca Ray across all the socials. I'm mainly on Instagram and LinkedIn, and you can find me at rebeccaray.com.au on the web.
Beautiful, amazing. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you again. Thank you.